Hey, welcome to the Cheap Air Gunner channel. It's Cherokee Steve, and what I noticed and what this video is going to be about is refilling my carbon fiber tanks with my, basically this is a Young Hang copy, high pressure compressor, air compressor. I've done other videos on it and issues I've had with it. The filtration system I have installed on it. I would go back and check out those. This is simply going to be a quick demonstration video. I have two carbon fiber tanks. One is topped off with an Ninja EZ regulator, which is basically unregulated. What this allows you to do is fill whatever it is you're filling, in this case PCP air guns, to whatever pressure the tank is rated at, which is 4,500 psi. So something that's like 2.5 bar or over 2,900 psi, which an example of one that I own that is like that is my Hotson Hercules Bully. This allows me to use this tank to fill that particular gun over 2 bar, 2,900 psi. And what I had noticed was this had dropped down to just under 3,000 psi. My other carbon fiber tank is regulated to 2 bar. The output pressure that this tank is capable of is only 2,900 psi. So once it's filled up to 4,500 psi, I can get numerous fills out of it until it drops down to 2,900 psi. Also has dropped down to just under 3,000 psi. The compressor itself is water cooled. I have a bucket over here with the output and return tube from the compressor. And basically what I do, I like to keep my water nice and cold. Really important as far as prolonging the life of these compressors. This one I've had for, I would say, close to 2 years. And other than burst discs needing to be replaced, I really haven't had any issues with it. You know, it's got oil. You want to obviously change that on a regular basis, which I do. I use distilled water. In this case, I've got approximately 2 gallons. It's purplish in color because I also have added some royal purple cooling liquid to it. It's going to get dumped into the bucket. I also, with distilled water, fill up some empty water bottles and put them in the freezer in the garage. And throw these in with the water. I have 3 of them. That will also help maintain the water staying cold during the operation of the compressor. The 2 bleed valves, there's one on each side of the compressor. I'm going to close the intake bleed valve, but leave the one on the outboard side that's going to be feeding air to the filtration system. I'm going to leave that open rather than for it to immediately be under pressure. The back pressure caused by the tank being hooked up to it will put back pressure on the piston and all the parts in the compressor. So I want to keep that bleed valve open. I don't close the bleed valve until after I start the compressor, and then keep an eye out for the pressure to build as it should. Start with the black tank. Quick connect hose hookup. I have an old guitar stand here that I use for holding the tank. It works out pretty nicely, and I have my filter system zip tied onto the upper post on the guitar stand. Plugged in. Get the compressor plugged in. There we go. Just started. I've got water. I don't know if you can see it, but water from the return tube going back. It's about 18 degrees Celsius. It should get up to, I think the highest I've ever had it get up to is about 60 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that computes out to Fahrenheit, but that's within an acceptable operating range. If this was something, if these tanks were completely empty and I had to fill them from empty and the compressor would be running for a long time, I'd really want to keep an eye out on that temperature gauge. Usually around 15 minutes. That's about as long as you want it to run. It will start running hot. The water will start leveling off to room temperature. But at that point, I'd want to stop, let it cool down, the compressor itself, and then fill from that point after it cooled again. But because I'm just topping it off, this should all be done in one shot. But at that point, after it starts, I'm going to close the bleed valve and just keep an eye on the pressure. It should start filling almost immediately. So it's done filling. Key thing is to open up the bleed valve prior to shutting off the compressor. Because of the noise, I wasn't going to put you through the ordeal of watching the filling process. It took about 5 minutes to get it from 3,000 psi back up to 4,500 psi. Open the bleed valve, shut off the compressor. It got up to about 56 Celsius. But this one is done. That's not really focusing in too great, but it was at 4,500 psi. As the air cools, it's going to drop a little bit. But another key thing to remember with these compressors, they're rated to a fill pressure of 30 MPa. That's important because 30 MPa is actually slightly under 4,500 psi. They're not rated for filling things to 4,500 psi. So I'm really pushing it by taking the gauge up to 4,500 psi. Probably should stay a little bit under that. It is definitely cooled off and dropped a little bit under 4,500 psi. So that one's done. I'm simply going to go through the same process with my other tank. I'm not going to bore you with watching that. But when it's all done, it's basically shut it down, open up the bleed valves, shut it down, and then just use the return hose to pump the water back into the containers that I use to hold the water, take the containers, put them back in the fridge in the garage, take the bottles, water bottles that had frozen water in it that is going to largely be melted, and put those back in the freezer. Like I said, routine maintenance, changing the oil, keeping an eye on the filter media that I use inside the filters, which is desiccant filter media that I use in conjunction with cotton. Really works really well. I use 3 smaller stage filters rather than one long one. It was just cheaper that way. But it offers the same pretty much filtration as one long filter. I went the cheapest route and did some math and figured out that 3 smaller units attached to each other was cheaper than a single long one. Certainly is easier breaking open a single unit and checking the filter media, but what I have found is in the third and last filter in the line, it rarely, nothing virtually ever moisture-wise or dirt-wise gets to the third filter. It really, I am confident that it really, at that point, is pumping clean, dry air into my tanks. That's about it. Really highly recommend, if you have PCP air guns, yes, I do have your standard typical, well, there's cobwebs all over it because I haven't used it in quite a while, but hand pump, totally capable of filling the 2-bar PCPs that I have. Definitely, physically, I am incapable of using it to fill my Hot Sun Hercules Bully, which goes up to 2.5 bar. I think that's approximately 3,250 PSI. I would not be able to use that. I struggle, and it's a pain in the butt to get my other PCPs filled with that. Hand pump. So definitely recommend one of these. If you're going to get into PCP air guns, I personally would recommend factoring that into the cost if you're a first-time PCP buyer. Certainly you can get away with a hand pump if it's a 2,900 PSI fill, and the smaller the tank, the less pumping you're going to have to do, the tank on the gun itself. You definitely would never use something like that to fill one of these carbon fiber tanks. You definitely need something like this if you're going to go the carbon fiber tank route and use that to fill your guns. You can certainly go straight from this into your gun. It's just easier instead of, re-going through the water filling process of the bucket, getting it flowing, using this every single time I wanted to fill a gun. Gets to be quite tedious, and led me to purchasing some carbon fiber tanks. So, I hope this was of some help. Again, great little units. This one I picked up at, like I said, it was about 2 years ago. The person on eBay was selling it for, I believe, $200 or best offer, and I offered $190 with free shipping, and they accepted the offer. So I was able to pick this up for under $200. So for the cost of a couple of hand pumps, maybe 3 hand pumps, I was able to pick this up, and definitely is worth the investment, in my opinion. So, hope this helps you guys. Guys, shoot straight, stay safe, and take care.